that Dylan Raiola has decided to flip his commitment from Georgia to Nebraska. This is Seismic news, mostly in Lincoln, Nebraska, but also in the 24 recruiting class, as this is the number 2 ranked quarterback and number 1 to many, including me, quarterback in the 2024 class, deciding that he's not going to play for a team that won the last 2 national championships, but going to go to a program that has been down basically since you joined the Big Ten. It's coming off a 5-7 season, and yet this commitment, this flip commitment, feels like the biggest win of the Matt Rhule era so far. And I think that's important to state, because we're talking about a Nebraska program that was really having to lean on what the Raiola name means at Nebraska more than the name Nebraska means for college football, which is a wild thought for those of us that remember the 90s or even the 80s, that really do remember Mike Rozier, right? Really do remember Eric Crouch, to make some reference to Dylan Raiola's poem, but also remember Tommy Frazier and Amon Green and just what those 90s Nebraska teams were about, specifically the 95 team, which is ridiculous. And yet we're talking about Raiola being the thing that brings Dylan back to Lincoln. He grew up a Huskers fan. His father, Dominic, not Donovan. Donovan is his uncle. Dominic played center at Nebraska, was a Remington Award winner and an All-American on those really great Nebraska teams. His uncle Donovan is the offensive line coach at Nebraska, and tellingly, Matt Rhule chose to keep him off of the staff that came in before. So this guy was coaching for Scott Frost. He looked around and said, "Oh, your last name is Raiola. I actually want that dude to play quarterback. Maybe I should probably keep you around." Now, this is not to say that Donovan Raiola, my goodness, is not a great offensive line coach, because he is. But if you are Matt Rhule, you are putting all your chips into the Dylan Raiola basket, not just because he's one of the better players in this particular class, but because you were absolutely abysmal and trash at quarterback in 2023. As a matter of fact, that was the glaring weakness on an otherwise decent Nebraska football team. It was one-dimensional at a time when every other good program prides itself on being multiple, both offensively and defensively. And yet, Nebraska could not throw the football. As a matter of fact, they started 3 different quarterbacks, including Jeff Sims, Heinrich Harburg, and Chuba Purdy. And none of those dudes managed to complete more than 59.6% of their passes. And they combined to throw just 10 TDs in 12 games and 16 INTs in the same amount. It gets worse. The leading rusher at Nebraska was a quarterback who was 3rd on the depth chart. All 3 of the quarterbacks are among the top 6 rushers on the team, and nobody rushed for more than 477 yards all season. Yet and still, Nebraska managed to put itself into position to be bowl eligible for the first time since 2016 and squandered all 3 opportunities. It is a team that could not win when the stakes had never been higher for them in the last 7 years, right? And yet you're looking at a guy like Dylan Raiola, who is a prototypical, large, athletic passer who can throw a football 70 yards off a crow hop, who is accurate with the ball, and has been really great wherever he has played high school football, both in Arizona and across the country at Buford High School in Georgia. This is also coming off of him flipping his commitment from Ohio State to Georgia last May and writing the word home across, his social media, where he was announcing himself to be a Georgia Bulldog. Many people would tell you Nebraska was not out of the sweepstakes until Dylan Raiola decided to sign with anybody else. And that was all that Matt Rhule needed to do. He just needed to get that dude back to Lincoln, get him around this group of people that really love his last name, really love what his family has done with the program and for the program, and a guy that has grown up wearing the Huskers colors and should be able to remember Nebraska when it was not that bad. Matter of fact, arguably one of the better teams in the Big 12 when you had Ndamukong Suh playing defensive tackle, really going after that Texas squad that was pretty damn good as Nebraska was transitioning out of the Big 12 into the Big 10. But this is also a larger point from the historical aspects of what Nebraska has been. This is just the first 5-star that they have signed or will have signed, committed, since 2011. And they've only had 3 in the recruiting ranking era, which is also right about the time that we stopped talking about Nebraska being one of the better teams in college football. And we started talking about Nebraska being somehow out of place in the Big Ten because since joining, they haven't looked great. As a matter of fact, I would even argue that it's gotten worse for Nebraska as it's gotten better for some other programs that we have really thought to be bad. For instance, Rutgers has gone bowling twice as often as Nebraska in the last 3 years. There are those of us of a certain age who would absolutely call me a liar. Absolutely tell me, no, there's no way that's true. It's Rutgers, and that's Nebraska. Yeah, dog. That's how it has been for Nebraska. Now, it's not to throw shade at Rutgers, who is doing outstanding, right, with Greg Schiano making his second return there, but the point is taken there. You don't expect to live in a world where Rutgers is bowling and Nebraska is not, and yet that's where we are. So Dylan Raiola is not only a high-profile recruit committed to an otherwise bad football program, but he gives Nebraska a reason to be optimistic in the new Big Ten in 2024. That is not a small thing, and that is worth all the NIL bags that are going to come his way, because in 2024, it's not just that you still have to try to compete with Ohio State, with Michigan, with Penn State, with Iowa. It's that you also now have to compete with UCLA, USC, Oregon, and Washington. What were you going to do in this period where we've even seen Purdue play for a Big Ten championship? We have seen Northwestern play for a Big Ten championship, and yet the mighty Nebraska can't even get up off the mat. And that is what Dylan Raiola may allow. He has made their quarterback position not only one that we can call credible, but make them a sort of a threat, kind of a threat, maybe a team that you don't get to overlook going into this 2024 season. And I'm empathetic. I'm sympathetic. I'm an Oklahoma guy, which means that I know in my bones what it was like to fear Nebraska, right? I understand that. And you know what? I miss it. Just like I miss Arkansas being good. I think college football is a lot more fun when Nebraska is good, because there is nothing like being the pro team in a state that ain't got a pro team, okay? I understand that in Oklahoma, we got the Oklahoma City Thunder, but the pro team is the Oklahoma Sooners. In Nebraska, they don't even have to deal with any of that. The pro team is in Lincoln. And, you know, good gracious, I'm so glad that the volleyball team steps up for them. And, you know, they lost a heartbreaker to Texas in the volleyball national championship, but I shudder to think what Nebraska would be like if they are not winning at something. And to be able to do what they have done on the volleyball side in the Big Ten, you got to believe that the football program feels kind of some level of, well, embarrassment. Because, yeah, the volleyball program is having to carry you, right? And at a time when you're used to the football program having to carry you, you've had donors have to buy out parts of the stadium so you can keep your sellout streak going, because ain't nobody showing up to see you get, you know, beat up on Fordham or lose to Georgia Southern. That's just what it's been. I was in Lincoln when Oklahoma went out there and gave them the what for and the how now just last year. I really wanted Nebraska to win somebody, but we thought it was going to be one of these guys out of the transfer portal we'll talk about here in a little bit. But as the weekend unfolded, it unfolded exactly the way that it needed to for a guy like Dylan Raiola to look around, to take stock, to see what his family thought, and to make this decision to go big red instead of going all in on those dogs. I could not be more happy, or happier, I should say, for Nebraska fans who get to celebrate this and get to celebrate this before Christmas. And you're going to get this guy on campus in January, and there's nobody there really to compete with him for the job. So he also gets to walk into a situation where we all but expect him to start right away. And we do this because, yeah, man, that's what freshmen, especially 5-stars and top 50 quarterback recruits, expect now. As a matter of fact, get into this over and over again as we talk. Nearly half of the 2022 top 50 quarterback recruits have already transferred. So it stands to reason that if he did not play right away, he might go into the portal too. And if you're a guy that's played in 3 different high school offenses at 3 different high schools in 3 years in 2 different states that are separated by an entire nation, by the lower 48, by 3,000 miles, you might not be so in on the program that ain't deciding to play you, right? So I think that everybody's more or less getting what they want here. Georgia is not going to, its feelings are not hurt here, because Georgia is not a football program that tends to believe that the quarterback is going to make or break their national championship aspirations. As a matter of fact, far from it. They went back-to-back with Stetson Bennett as starting quarterback. And I understand the Georgia Bulldogs feel some kind of way about Stetson Bennett, but to the rest of us, that's a dude that walked on that you told to kick rocks and who had an offer to Louisiana before Kirby Smart said, hey, you want to come back? That's a dude that y'all got to throw out there instead of JT Daniels. That's a dude who won you a national championship so that we don't thumb our nose at, you had Justin Fields and you did this? No, that's just what Georgia has been about. And given what Carson Beck has meant to that program and him announcing his return mere hours before Dylan Raiola flipped his commit, yeah, I think all of this comes into play. And I think this is going to be a fascinating story to see unfold as the Big Ten continues to show us what it is actually made of in this new era of the Power 2. And I, for one, am excited. I really am. I like the quarterback play that is already in the Big Ten. I think it's going to get better. I think Chip Kelly and Lincoln Riley and Kalen DeBoer and Dan Lanning are all going to do great things, like Dylan Gabriel's committed to go to Oregon. Will Rogers committed to go to Washington. As a matter of fact, we're going to get into those things a little bit later on. But again, hammer it home. You cannot overstate what a big deal it is for a talent of Dylan Raiola at the position of most importance on a football field. Going to a program like 5-7 Nebraska is for the sport, for the Big Ten, and for the future of what we come to know of as Big Ten football. If you like what you've seen, consider subscribing to the #1 college football show on YouTube, the Fox Sports app, or wherever you get your podcast.